So we need some sort of peer review, some other body to see what's being done in the executive regulation, not to have it like overnight, and it would be applicable to anyone and abiding for everyone. We do not want this to happen overnight. Thank you so much. I'm so happy for being here with you, Dr. Hassan Badrawi. I'd like to thank all the participants here for being here with us. I'd like to divide my presentation into four parts. The first part is relevant to this meeting, and another part is in relation to the rationale of the law and its logistics, and another one is relevant to the civil work and the relationship between civil work and the politics. And another thing is something that we do not speak about a lot, which is who is representing NGOs before the state. These are the unions, because there is a very important part that we need to be attentive to in relation to what we do as NGOs. Who represents us when negotiating with the state? Is a specific person, a specific NGO, or the union or federation of NGOs? So, because I think there is a role to be played by such a federation, and for you as pioneering bodies in the civil work. Let me start because I'm a positive, proactive man, so I look at the filled part of the cup, and I'd like to second what has been said by Dr. Ziad, because we are saying that we are not criticizing anything, just we want to be proactively speaking in an initiative to say what we want to be included and incorporated in this piece of legislation, rather than being fault finders and commenting on the faults and defects of the law, because everybody knows. So the proactive approach, I'd like to thank you so much, Dr. Ziad, for this call, and I do ask you in your comments, dear participants, to be proactively oriented, to talk to us about what to do or the solutions, so that we can have a better situation for the NGOs. The other dimension is in relation to the philosophy or the rationale behind the law. And Dr. Ziad, when speaking about the disclosure and transparency, it is in fact both way. It is on the part of the state and on the part of the NGOs as well. Because as you know, if if there is an objection or rejection without any grounds or reasons, this is a lack of transparency on the part of the state. So we want if they want to have the NGOs, which are really important institutions, to be transparent, the state accordingly or in turn needs to be that transparent. But the main philosophy or rationale is that without civil work, it is really difficult to have full-fledged development. And there are big NGOs, there are small NGOs. Not all NGOs are alike. Not all of them can pay or afford 10,000 in order to be set up, and some can pay far more than this. So we need to be having the bird view, looking at everything in Egypt, and we have the 7 tragic years. So we need to give description. And the economic, it was the small economy, which is very small, and the NGOs, small NGOs were working. So if they don't have boards, if they are not spoken about in newspapers, this does not mean that they are not working. They do, but we need to provide due respect to everyone. Also, another thing which is in fact relevant to the societal culture, which is the difference between the control and monitoring and oversight. Control on the one hand, oversight on the other hand. And let me say that there is some sort of a gray area between what is regulation. Let me define the word oversight with another word, which is regulation and control. The state is up for control, while we all are up for regulation. Everybody needs regulation, wants regulation. To the contrary, in fact, when people are deregulated, this may be, in fact, a stain in the credit of all of us. So we need not to have people handicapping us or imposing on us. So we need a line of demarcation which is putting the end of the regulation and the beginning of the control. And this is the relationship between the state and the universities have the same gray area between the regulation and control, and it is the state, the relationship between the state and different institutions, which because the regulation is different from controlling, because regulation gives flexibility and freedom to the institution as long as it's regulated. Another thing which is logistic related, Dr. Baha has been speaking about the premises issue or the headquarters dimension in relation to setting up the or establishing the society. I say I agree with him. When I say this, I agree. Also, the freedom restricting punishments, I agree, and second what has been said. But the difference is that NGOs need to be working within, when we say that the NGOs need to work within the state overall plan or national plan, I think that this is a bit exaggerated. We need to say that everybody shall work for the public good, but not the public good as stipulated in the plan of the state, because this is in itself is an over control over the NGO work. The issue of approvals, I do agree, and second what has been said by Dr. Ziad, so the approval does not need 60 days to be issued, and the non-response does not mean rejected. This is very serious, too serious in fact, because it is meaning lack of efficiency on the other authority that's regulating. So if they are not able to judge something which is right or wrong, they just keep silent, and keeping silent meaning objection? No. When we notify with the establishment, if there is no clear-cut rejection, it would mean approval. It goes without saying. And this philosophy is changing now in everything, in fact. In fact, I had a story of, in fact, we were selling our hospital. When you are selling the hospital or any health facility, you need the approval of the Ministry of Health. And the law stipulates that notify the Ministry of Health. If not, if they didn't reply, it means that that's an approval. In fact, they are saying it otherwise. They say non-approval means rejection, which is not the case. And here the same thing. The non-action means approval. This is what we mean. So we have the constitution, and we know the entitlements stipulated in these constitutions are not enforced on the ground, particularly the local administration, which is entitled to be this year, and we didn't have any elections, local elections or anything whatsoever, or even the law. We have entitlements, so many entitlements provided for in the constitution, and nobody is really jealous why it's not, or having bad feelings about why it's not enforced. Rather, and to the contrary, sometimes you feel like it's indifferent. The constitution itself will change and everything will change. No, this is not a civilized way in dealing in a community. We have more than 90% turnout for the constitution, despite the some tiny details they don't like inside the constitution. But we need all to be seriously supporting the fact that there is a need to have the entitlement stipulated in the constitution to be implemented on the ground and to be translated in a piece of legislation. And if the piece of legislation is carrying prejudice to the constitution, we have a constitutional court that shall adjudicate in this to say that it's unconstitutional. So if we really want to be having governance, we need to respect this. So this law on NGOs, it can be worthless and valueless, even if it was the best rosy picture in a text, because implementation, the devil comes in the implementation details. I'm building takatuf, meaning solidarity, and Nile Badrawi institution, we hand over a school to the state each 7 months, a fully equipped facilities, trained teachers, medication for students, and programs for parental programs. And then Japan says your work is really nice, we want to fund with you. We take 1 year and a half for this funding to be received, while we are giving the state a school each 7 months. The ministry is saying this is not my problem. I sent it to the security apparatus or security people. The security say it's not our problem. It's with Mr. So, and Mr. So sends it to Mr. X, and Mr. X sends it to Mr. Y, and then the offer of the Japanese people lapses because it's 1 year and a half. So we didn't get the money for us for another school to be built, and we didn't achieve the objective. So instead of one school each 7 months, it would have been two each 7 months, but it didn't work because of the procedural red tape which is being done with prejudice to the law. So it needs to be connected to the politics here. At the end of it, everything that we are doing in the civil society needs to be under a real or supported by a real political will. If the genuine political will is missing, the respect of the civil society and the respect for the role of the civil society and the impact of the civil society, if these are not there, whatever the nice picture of what's being done on text will not be implemented on the ground. This is what we learn from experience. And as civil society, we do not have any means to tell the state, hey state, you are losing. When I'm losing, you're losing with me. So there is the political dimension which is of paramount importance. The political dimension which is regulating, not controlling. It is the political dimension that it believes in the civil community, not just decoration issue or for appearances. I'm saying okay because it's appearances issue. It is the political dimension. We want that in a way that believes on the pillars of development, having CSOs as one of the milestones of development. Also, it is the political dimension which believes that no gray area would be there in order to know whether this is a political issue or a developmental issue. In Al-Halimun Bilghad or the Dreamers of Tomorrow society, when we are training them, for example, to be positive citizens, is this politics or this development? If they like me, if the government likes you, they would say development. If they don't like you, they would say it's politics. This is the reality. So we need such lines of demarcations and borders, because the political work, the social work, and so much part of the social work is having its political grounds. So you cannot say that anybody working in politics need to be shut down. No. All the human development aspects are of political nature in one way or another, because you are building the good citizen. The good citizen, can you tell a good citizen anything other than going for elections, turn out in elections? No. You want good citizen, positive, proactive, participating, building constructive, not destructive citizen, a citizen able to have self-determination, to determine for himself. And this would need a democratic framework. So we do hope that the political dimension and the NGO law needs to be really reflecting a political will, not just to be appealing to others. I don't want to be lengthy because I want to listen to you. It is the issue of the unions. All the unions that are representing civil society organizations are political ones. We do not select them, we do not know them. He means also federations. The word may carry unions or federations. So I'm sure of what I'm saying. So at the end of the day, if the organizations had a trade union and all the trade unions are under a federation, so they are representing us, I don't think that any of these unions go to the federation of the trade unions, and they do not think that about whether it's really representative or not. So the democratic framework for the NGO work is really important. So the proactive approach, as mentioned by Dr. Ziad, has as part and parcel being active about who would be representing us, to select who would be representing us. In fact, this is negligence on our part. We never ask We don't attend meetings, and they tell you this is the head of the Federation of Trade Unions. You never know this guy. It's just a guy appointed by the state. So it is similar to the local elections when you have the local council headed by the governor. If the implementer is the adjudicator or the person, so the executive authority or the executor is holding himself accountable in front of himself. So all these need real, genuine political will. And I do hope that we would have such a trend. And I'm here not speaking to addressing the state. I'm addressing the NGOs to respect that there are trade unions and there are federations, and we need to be selecting who is representing us. And when the state is saying something at odds with what we want as NGOs, we would have some people who are really representing our saying. I'd like to stop here in order to give opportunity to other people to have the floor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hossam, for your input, your constructive comments. Of course, institutional reform is the base of all Egypt's problem, and if we address this, many things will follow. Of course, you cannot have the governor as the head of the local council. And thank you so much for referring to the constitutional entitlements, and thank you also for stressing the point of notification, because that was clearly mentioned in the constitution when it was first drafted. Good morning, everyone. And I would like to welcome Dr. Ziad and thanking him for raising these points, because this topic is important. I'd like to also thank Dr. Abla for giving us this opportunity to discuss this topic. And I'd like to commend her selection of the speakers. I don't want to repeat what was already covered. Dr. Hossam referred to some thorny issues that I want to stress on. I would pick up from what Dr. Hossam left off. When it comes to constitution, it's important to remind everyone of the constitutional text already in place, because this is the governing framework. In Article 75 in the Constitution, citizens have the right to assemble and convene associations, and this might have a natural or legal personality upon notification, and they should practice activities freely, and no administrative authorities should intervene or should dissolve a board of trustees and board of directors unless there is a court ruling, and all the civil society organizations will be prohibited if they have secret military or paramilitary activities as mentioned in the relevant laws. So this is the current text. And later I will discuss the prohibited or forbidden activities. And this refers to two points referred to by Dr. Ziad and Dr. Hossam: political activities and the professional syndicate activities. And here I want to refer to the relationship between the state and NGO sector. What do we want this relationship to look like? Many of the legal texts in the current law derived from the lack of trust between the state and the civil society. So it's imperative for the community to build this trust. It should look for mechanisms to do so. Many state ideas are listed inside this law, and we might like that or we might not like that, we might agree or disagree. Dr. Ziad referred to foreign funding done in a certain administrative framework that differs from domestic funding coming from community members themselves. So we might agree or disagree with the details and the implementation and regulation mechanism. So this trust can be reflected in three points referred to by Dr. Ziad. Throughout the life cycle of these NGO, of course, there are a number of restrictions imposed on registration and establishment, despite the fact that the law stipulates that people can establish associations upon notification, and upon notification it has a legal personality. Here, what are the requirements for registration on the part of NGO? If these requirements diverted and have become overly restrictive and burdensome, then this necessarily will hinder this constitutional right. Building on these constitutional entitlements, a law in the 90s was known as the NGO law, and it was referred to the Constitutional Court, and it was rendered unconstitutional. Regardless of the grounds of this verdict, in its judgment, the Constitutional Court mentioned many things that should be reminded of. This assembly should be voluntary, and this is a constitutional right for people to organize civil organizations, and based on these, then the right to build association is one of the main rights, and the law regulating these matters should be in line with the constitutional right in letter and spirit, and the freedom of this association and the branching out association should have the freedom of management, and legislators should not impose any restrictions that will prejudice this constitutional right. So regulating should not be restricting or encroaching upon this right. We have a constitutional text, we have a judgment issued by the Constitutional Court interpreting this text, and this should be the base for management or drafting legal texts managing NGOs. So all the administrative complications that serve as a barrier to enforcing this constitutional right shouldn't be in place. And Dr. Ziad, in his version, tried to enlist many details in order to avoid the discretionary power, and this is commendable. I just have one thing to add. Sometimes in certain legal texts we say that the administrative authority have the power to set certain texts, and I want Dr. Ziad to replace this administrative authority with the word executive by law or executive regulation. I don't want this national authority to be given all these powers. Back to building the trust. I want to have transparency and mutual respect and trust, because we want to have simple and clear-cut texts defining roles for each part. I want to refer to the syndicate or professional syndicate activities. Of course, we will have a kind of overlapping. I'm not saying that NGOs should give a practicing license for lawyers, but maybe NGOs might want to conduct some activities relevant to lawyers training or any other activities that might be covered under syndicates. I did not research that, but do we have a clear-cut definition on what is done or what's considered a professional syndicate activity? The definition is important. Back to the importance of the definitions, Dr. Ziad did not include in his draft a chapter or an article on definitions because the current law adopted these definitions approach, which is not in line with the Egyptian legislation history, but it's a good initiative. It's good to have or to build trust between civil society sector and the state. And Dr. Ziad differentiated between domestic funding and foreign funding, so I will not repeat that. There is no doubt that over the recent years a new phenomenon emerged that has to do with NGOs in Egypt and elsewhere. And between 2005 and 2011, many problems arose that have to do with foreign funding, and we can agree or disagree on the fact that certain NGOs conducted some illegal activities, but this is an international problem. If you search on the internet for NGOs working in Europe or the US, these associations make mistakes, have defects, which built a barrier between these NGOs and the communities they are trying to serve. That's why we need to ask NGOs the same way we ask the state to take a more liberal stance towards NGOs and civil associations. We should ask NGOs or CSOs to be transparent, and transparency should be reflected in periodical reports issued, and this covers spending, donations, activities. Some NGOs collect and spend billions, and they publish many ads or commercials, but you don't find publications to cover the money raised and the activities achieved, and these pieces of information should be published on their own website or other mechanisms.
Also, accountability. Accountability, it is not necessarily, and in fact, let me first refer to what has been said by Dr. Ziad. In fact, it shall not be only accountability before the state as a regulation body. Also, it is need to be accountability before the civil society itself. So, the Ministry of Solidarity can establish a specific independent authority for some sort of classification of or some sort of taxonomy. So Dr. Zed was referring to the websites to see information whether I will give donation to this or that. But the same thing they do with credit and the credit ranking, and they tell you that you are A or whatever in a bank. So we need to have a specific ranking authority, independent authority, to give such ranking to the NGOs. It needs to be independent, impartial, not governmental, little. So we need to see how can we establish such a kind of an authority in order to see specific rankings of the NGOs based on the this is part and parcel of the transparency and accountability. So there will be some sort of public ranking and evaluation. Also, the issue of auditors or audits. I prefer that the audit shall not be starting to work under a very big ceiling. So if they are working, if they are self-financing, I mean by the NGOs, they do not need any audits. But if they got any funding outside external funding from donations, whether direct donations or fundraising activities, in this case we need to have the audits. And this, and Dr. Ziada knows what I will be saying. In the FRA, which is the Financial Regulatory Authority, or EFSA, they have a specific criteria for the audits. So if the activities of the NGO is above a specific ceiling, an audit needs to have specific qualifications and characteristics so that to be trustworthy, and for the report of this person to be trustworthy. And this means an additional financial burden on the part of any NGO, because of course everything is for a cost. The punishments or penalties, undoubtedly. The current law stipulates penalties, which and I don't know specific penalties, but I don't know if the civil society would be able to convince the state of what we are talking about in here. But this is a topic that has been talked about for 40 years, and there is the so-called economic cost of a punishment or a penalty. So the state, which is having money to build prisons and providing food and medication to prisoners, so is it really punishing only the person who had committed the offense or the perpetrator, or punishing the whole community, because it's a money which is taken from the state budget. So sometimes it's not just for embezzlement of money here. We're not speaking about embezzlements and such kind of issues, but sometimes if they abstain from allowing the administrative competent authority to work on inspection and examination, if this happens, oblige them through a fine, notify prisons. Also for the relocation of the premises to a place other than what's notified. Sometimes people are delayed for one reason or another. I don't know how this would be done purposefully. For what reason people would relocate their premises purposefully? And if they don't flee outside of the country, what's the problem in this? Why they should yes, if you see that it's a problem, okay, fine, or a specific punishment, but not freedom restricting punishment. Another idea is, and Dr. Ziad, in fact, you kindly, frankly spoken about two things. You have said that you can have some profitable activities or can go for profit, I mean by you the NGOs, and can be shareholders in companies, because the last jurisprudent or legal ruling, or what we call legal fatwa, is from the State Council, which is stipulating or stating that they cannot be shareholders in a company, because the rationale is that an NGO needs to be non-profit, so it cannot be a shareholder or a partner in a for-profit or profit-oriented entity. But at the same time, we're speaking about for-profit activity. So what makes the difference is what kind of activity. Is it a small enterprise? Is it a kiosk? Is it a corporate? I think the real standard is to allow it or not, whatever in what kind of a shape. Also, the civil society organizations will or in fact the current law is providing some kind of benefits. We can have also some regulations for the transparency ourselves, in fact, because some countries are not providing exemptions. And here I'm speaking mainly on exemptions. Sometimes exemptions are not being given from the first day. So, just as automatic kind of an exemption. In some countries, they have a whole set of standards. When the CSO achieves a specific standard, then they are able to have exemptions. But these countries have well consolidated work on CSOs better than ourselves. Maybe we need some time to be like them. Also, in relation to the measures in the draft law done by Dr. Ziad. He is speaking about that the administration and the minister can have some measures in some of the breaches and violations in a stepwise approach or the progressive approach. But in fact, he was speaking about the clarity of the court. Is the court able to dissolve directly? Is the minister or the administrative authority able to directly dissolve or liquidate a CSO, or it shall be through a court warrant or a court verdict? With regard to the trade unions, in fact, I don't understand them, so I disagree with you. You are saying that you don't know what's their role because they are not representing really those who shall be represented by trade unions. So I think that this shall not be a chapter of this law, and Dr. Ziad has not, in fact, included it in his draft version. I don't know why. Do you agree with me, Dr. Ziad, that we need to have other way other than the unions to represent the community, because the trade unions are not representing the civil society, and in fact, because you have this federation, the Federation of Unions and the trade unions, in fact, they are not up to the expected results because of the way their boards are being comprises and the restrictions imposed on them. I'd like to stop at this point.